Okay, welcome to BusinessWorks. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the episode 3. So this is our third show, and we thought of kind of bringing out a topic to help all of you, the business community. So what we thought is to help you with understanding the current government schemes that's out there to help the businesses. So I know so many businesses are really struggling right now, and I know some businesses that closed down as well. So it's a very tough time to all of you guys. Hopefully this topic will help all of you. So talking a bit about BusinessWorks, since it's our third show, we are here to help the businesses. We talk about business topics, so this can help all of you, basically anyone who wants to learn something new. So, uh, so today we brought someone special to talk about the topic. Before I say anything else, watch this video.
My name is Michael Buckworth, and I'm the founder of Buckworths. Buckworths is the only law firm in the UK working exclusively with startups and high-growth businesses. We advise our clients all the way from incorporation through investment rounds and to exit. At the moment, we're providing a lot of assistance to clients with accessing COVID-19 reliefs and raising investment and other sorts of funding.
So now you know. It's Michael Buckworth. He's the managing partner of Buckworth. He works with a lot of startups. He's currently, I know for a fact that he's currently working with a lot of businesses, helping them understanding this COVID-19 relief schemes and helping them to apply for these schemes. So, Michael, how are you doing today?
It's good to be talking on this show.
Thank you very much for coming. I know that you are really, really busy, but thank you very much. So, Michael, what are you doing these days?
Well, I guess with everybody, just like everyone else, we're all stuck at home. So we, as a firm, moved home sort of at the very beginning of lockdown. I think the first couple of days were pretty odd, pretty weird, as we all got used to home working. But now we're sort of up and running. Everything's going really well. And we're spending a lot of our time, obviously, helping our clients and SMEs and startups sort of access the coronavirus reliefs, which we'll talk about in a sec. There are obviously lots of them. But I think also more now trying to figure out what the next step is. So as the UK, it looks like very slowly moves out of lockdown, how a business is going to get up and running and what is that going to look like?
Perfect. Yeah, and I know this is a really tough time as well for businesses, and as individuals as well. We are stuck at home, and like now it's getting really crazy. Like it's really tough, basically, even for creative industries like us, where we need to go out to film. So
It's crazy. It's completely unprecedented as well. I mean, I remember just a few months ago, everyone was moaning about Brexit and how completely unprecedented this was. It was going to cause huge amounts of disruption. The economy was going to suffer. Brexit's completely insignificant compared to this, right? Like it
indeed,
doesn't even compare.
indeed. So let's kind of help the businesses. That's why we brought this topic up. I know that so many businesses that some of my friends as well, they are a bit confused as to what are the current schemes, and are we eligible, and how can we apply, right? So these are some of these schemes are a bit tough to understand, and tough to understand whether we qualify, right? So over to you, Mike. Just let us know what are these schemes, and how can we apply. Just talk a bit about these schemes, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think let's just take a sort of step back and look at what has happened and what the government have done. So this is obviously unprecedented. It came about, I think, relatively quickly. And certainly the move from what I think in beginning of March was very much business as usual. I think everyone was monitoring the infections, and we had people coming from abroad who potentially were ill being quarantined, but actually very little else happening. A couple of weeks later, we're all stuck in lockdown. Businesses have been told that they're not allowed to trade, so particularly restaurant businesses are not allowed to operate. And the rest of us are advised to stay at home with, pretty much all employers, right, sending their staff to work from home. So what happened very quickly, and actually in credit to the government, they moved really fast to introduce some initial schemes. And I think the biggest one, which obviously we'll talk about in a sec, was the furlough scheme. So this is the scheme that said the government would pay 80% of employee salaries for those people who are doing no work at all.
Right.
At the same time, they introduced a bunch of business rates relief. So for restaurant hospitality and leisure business, so retail hospitality and leisure businesses, there's 100% rebate for the entirety of this tax year. And again, you know, that was a pretty fast move to try to help those businesses who are most affected.
Right.
And then, you know, as time has gone on, the government have introduced additional schemes. And I think what they've been trying to do is, you know, patch problems in specific areas of the economy. I'll be honest, I don't necessarily think that they've got it right. So we'll talk a bit later about the Future Fund, which theoretically is a scheme to help tech startups.
Right.
The reality is it's going to help a very small number of startups, and it really doesn't address the bigger problem in the SME and startup sector, which is lots of businesses, you know, can't access these reliefs. Right. And I guess the final bit, and I think the key plank of the government's policy has been around these loan schemes. And you know, the big theme I think coming out of the use and the uptake of those loan schemes is that they're actually not that easy to access, and lots of businesses can't qualify for them and can't get the money that they so desperately need.
Right. Wow. So I know that like some of these schemes are like the eligibility is a bit uncertain. Like sometimes even I read some of the schemes about some of the schemes that's available right now, but then some companies might not actually be eligible to apply for this. Can you just talk a bit about these schemes in detail, and maybe some of the businesses might get an idea as to the eligibility?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of eligibility, the biggest problems have been around the loan schemes. So you know, that's a good place to start.
Right.
There are basically two sets of loan schemes for SMEs, so startups and small and medium-sized businesses. The first scheme was the Coronavirus Business Interruption Scheme, which was introduced back in March. Is a big scheme. You know, businesses can borrow quite a lot of money. And what we found is that there have really been two issues with accessing those schemes. The first issue has been around demonstrating to the lending bank affordability, so the ability to repay the loan, and the general sort of business viability going forwards. And so what we've seen is, you know, huge numbers of businesses being excluded from the lending because the banks aren't satisfied that, you know, inverted commas, they're viable businesses. And I think there's a couple of business areas and sectors that really struggle here. The first is startups who are dependent on raising investment. So, you know, that often is tech startups, but doesn't necessarily mean that. So those are the earlier stage businesses. They are theoretically going to be high growth businesses, but their focus is on traction, getting users rather than profitability. And for those businesses at that early stage, before they are definitely generating revenue, but even more before they have a clear route to profitability, the banks just won't lend to them. And so those businesses are immediately sort of shut out. I think the other businesses who are really struggling are your sort of restaurant businesses, businesses who there's no immediate route to them beginning to trade. So we don't know, we will find out on Sunday perhaps what the government's plans to end the lockdown are. Right. But for those businesses, they don't know how they're going to be able to get up and running. And more importantly, they don't know the conditions upon which they will be allowed to trade. And so if I, you know, talking to lots of our restaurant clients, for them being told that they can trade at 20, 30, 40, 50% capacity, that's not a viable business model for them. Right. You know, they need to be trading at probably 100% capacity in order to make money. So when they've had conversations with the banks, and the banks have said to them, well, you know, how are you going to repay these loans? You know, what's the plan? And their response has been, well, you know, when the lockdown ends, we think things will revert back to normal fairly quickly. A lot of the banks have just said, well, firstly, we don't think the lockdown will end in that way. We think you're going to have reduced trading requirements. And secondly, we don't think you're going to get up to normal trading standards for 12, 18 months. Right. So for those businesses, again, those loans are not affordable. The second criteria, and the one that has really tripped people up, is the concept of a business in difficulty. And so under the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, if you are a business in difficulty, you don't qualify for the loans. Now, obviously, businesses that are insolvent, that are in formal insolvency processes, I think everyone accepts they shouldn't be allowed to borrow. But there's a classification of business included, which is businesses whose accumulated losses exceed 50% of their paid up share capital. And what that means in practice is many startups, including those who've got active trading businesses moving towards profitability, they are excluded from this scheme because their accumulated losses are too high. And that particular rule has been taking out huge numbers of SMEs. Now, the good news is that the bounce back loan scheme, which is the smaller scheme announced by the government just last week, which allows businesses to borrow up to 50,000. That scheme has the same concept, but businesses can potentially, so businesses in difficulty can potentially still borrow subject to the meeting certain state aid rules. And basically what it means is they can't have had government relief over their lifetime with a value of more than 177,000.
Right.
So I think in the loan schemes, it's that business in difficulty definition that's really caused problems.
Right. And as we discussed earlier, I think we discussed a lot about, like all these schemes and, what we're going to talk about. And let's start with the furlough scheme that's available right now. So how does this work, Michael?
Yeah, so the furlough scheme is actually conceptually a pretty crazy departure from normal, sort of normal economy for the UK. So what effectively has happened is the government has stepped in and are paying the salaries of employees who otherwise would have been laid off. So employees who don't have any work to do, they are sat at home, unable to work. Employers have been able to furlough them, so effectively notify them that they will have no work to do, but they're remaining in employment. So rather than laying them off, rather than making them redundant, they are furloughed, and the government have been paying 80% of the salary of those furloughed employees.
Right.
Now, the uptake on that scheme has been extraordinary. I mean, it's been taken up by small business, larger businesses. I think the difficulty is how we're going to get out of that furlough scheme. So the furlough scheme formally ends at the end of June. So what, less than 2 months away now. Right. And at that point, unless the government do something to extend it, at that point, businesses will have to pick back up where they left off and start paying the full salary for all of their employees. And that will be whether or not they're able to work. And so one of the big debates at the moment is what's going to happen. And I think really there are two outcomes for businesses. The first is that the government extend the scheme. That seems quite unlikely, actually. Right. There have been sort of conversations or suggestions that the government may, reduce the scheme slightly. So perhaps they will say that we're only prepared to contribute 50% of salary, or they might allow sort of people who are doing some part-time work to qualify for it. Right. But I think the Treasury have made it clear that this isn't a scheme that can go on forever. Yeah. So assuming the government do nothing, businesses then have to figure out how they're going to be able to afford to pay the salaries of those people who currently are furloughed. Right. And what I think we're going to discover is that there's a really big funding gap for many businesses, because they have perhaps borrowed money, they have perhaps used up their resources in order to maintain operating costs through the lockdown period, and actually they're running on empty. And when the furlough scheme ends, they're not going to have the funds to be able to pick up those employees. So what are they going to do? Potentially they're going to have to fire people. And I think, as we'll talk about at the end, the really important thing that businesses need to focus on is that if they're likely to be in that position, they need to think about it now, not in 2 months' time, because employees may have notice periods that need to run and have to be paid for. If they're making significant numbers of people redundant, there are potentially consultation periods that have to be complied with. So I think this is something people need to think about, now, not in 2 months' time.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of businesses that's struggling with the furlough scheme as well. And the application process, is it a bit confusing, or what do you think about the application process for this furlough scheme, Mike?
I think it's one of these things, isn't it? It is a new scheme. I don't think it is the simplest application process that has ever been put together. Right. But again, in context, the government did it pretty quickly, and I think it is navigable. I think for people who are struggling, there are some ways forward. Almost all accountants are pretty much on top of the application process. Talking to your accountants about how to apply, I think, is a must if you're struggling yourself. There are HMRC helplines on this. They are pretty busy. It takes a while to get through to them, but I mean, it is possible. There's also, I think, one of the good things about this coronavirus crisis is that everybody is putting out explanatory videos and sort of explanatory content. So there's a lot of quite helpful information out there about how you actually use the scheme and how you access it. Right. I think the key things that people have been getting wrong, just from talking to some of our clients. When employees are furloughed, you do have to notify them that they are being furloughed, and there has to be a consent from them that they agree to that. Right. There are some important dates that are relevant in terms of the furlough scheme. So you can only furlough people who were employed effectively in March 2020. Right. And we have heard of employees or employers who have tried to furlough people who were taken on after that date. Right. Of course, that's not going to work. Right. It's not perfect.
Okay, and let's get to business rates and reliefs. I think we spoke a bit about it, right? But if you can explain a bit more about these schemes.
Yeah, so I think there's two bits here. The first, the sort of the government's headline announcements on business rates was their holiday for this tax year for retail, leisure, and hospitality businesses. Right. So, restaurants, retail businesses, they don't have to pay business rates. Now, this is an extension of a previous scheme. So the background to all of this was way before COVID-19 came along. The government had gone through a revaluation process a couple of years ago to revalue business properties for business rates. Right. And what had happened is that huge numbers of high street businesses had found that their business rates had rocketed and gone up really quite substantially. So the government basically had agreed to provide a reduction in business rates for retail, hospitality, and leisure businesses anyway. When COVID-19 came along, they put 100% relief in place. So fantastic news for those businesses. Now, what I would say is it's really important for businesses who have premises to actually check whether they qualify, because the definition of retail, hospitality, and leisure is really broad. So obviously it covers shops, charity shops, but it also covers other things: opticians, markets, petrol stations, garden centres, art galleries. It covers hair and beauty, so things like nail salons. Obviously restaurants, takeaways, but also pubs, bars, sort of music venues. So there's a whole bunch of people caught by this rates relief, and certainly we've had a number of clients who haven't realised that they are actually eligible for them. So that's the first bit of the business rates relief. The second bit that the government haven't spoken about and haven't really talked about is that all of us who have premises are entitled to a rates rebate for the period that we're not able to use our businesses. So, for the period of lockdown, we all have our office space or our retail space that we're not using. We can apply to the local authority to get a rebate for the business rates that we have paid or would normally have to pay. Right. My advice to people would be, don't do it now. Do it once everything's back to normal and you know exactly how many days you were out of the office. But then put in a claim. It's probably only a couple of grand for most people, but every penny counts. It's definitely worth doing it.
Indeed.
Is it worth talking about landlords as well here?
I think we should. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So I think one of the really, really difficult things with businesses is that, if you've got a premises, you've got offices, you can't really use them at the moment because of the government guidance. And yet many landlords are insisting that people continue to pay their rent. And this is a really difficult one because the principle of a lease is that the landlord makes available the property for you to use it. There's no guarantee within a lease that you will be able to use it. So, the mere fact that the government is telling me not to have my team in the office doesn't get the landlords, doesn't mean that I don't have to pay the rent. I still have to pay it to the landlord. The landlord is still entitled to claim for it. And I think that's very difficult for many businesses. There are some exceptions. So the two that I think are probably most common, if your landlord is sort of in control of your premises such that you can't access it, then potentially you don't have to pay rent. So the best example here would be businesses perhaps in a shopping centre where the landlord or the shopping centre owner has shut the doors, they barred the doors. Not only can customers not go in, but actually you can't access your premises either. I think it's a strong argument to say that those businesses should not be paying rent because they don't have that quiet enjoyment of their property.
Right.
I think the other one is around sort of serviced offices license fees. Almost all the serviced offices have kept them open. They've had sort of skeleton teams making sure that people can get in and go to the office if they want to. But there are some serviced offices who haven't, who just shut the buildings. If they've done that, again, no services are being provided, so you shouldn't be paying the license fee. So I think, those are the exceptions. As to, what can landlords do or what should businesses do? I think businesses should obviously talk to landlords, have a conversation, see if they are prepared to, in the best case, give you a rent holiday, so waive your obligation to pay rent. But perhaps in a worst case, just delay it. So you're going to have to pay the rent that's due, but perhaps the landlord agrees that you can delay it by 6 months or to the end of the year or something. Landlords can say no, they don't have to agree to this stuff, but it's totally worth the conversation. And actually, I think handled right, a lot of landlords are being relatively sort of cooperative and sympathetic.
Right.
As far as what happens if you can't afford to pay your rent, what happens in that circumstance? Well, the government have helped. They prevented commercial landlords and actually residential landlords as well from forfeiting leases. So they've stopped them terminating the lease for non-payment of rent.
Right.
They're also adjusting the insolvency rules. So what they're doing is trying to make it harder or stopping landlords winding up companies. So stopping them serve what are called statutory demands, which sort of give you 14 days to pay, stopping them serve winding up petitions because of non-payment of rent. Now, I think that's all very helpful. The big warning sign and the big sort of red flag here, this is only for a certain period of time. So the inability to forfeit leases is only for 3 months. If the government don't extend it, then there's a big risk that actually, when things go back to normal, businesses will either have to pay arrears or landlords will be able to take steps against them. So I think, it's okay for now, but people need to keep an eye on where the government go on further developments.
Yep, perfect. So we have to go for a quick break, ladies and gentlemen. So what we are talking about is the government grants and relief systems that's in place right now for businesses. And we are going to talk more after this break.
This is my dad. He was once a bubbly, happy, and positive person. He had been a cancer patient for many years. When I was younger, I remember our long winter walks, the fun times in the park, and all those hilarious jokes. After recovery, he was constantly tired, demotivated, and closed off. I didn't see the amazing smile anymore. That's when I developed my first well-being range using what my mom used on me as a kid, coconut oil. I incorporated coconut oil with my extensive research in aromatherapy oils to help improve his mood. So I gave him a moisturizer, diffuser, and candle, which we named Caribbean Mood. I saw a difference in him, and I saw the amazing smile he used to have. I knew I had to share this with the world. Okay, giving the organic lifestyle you deserve.
Okay, welcome to BusinessWorks, ladies and gentlemen, and we are talking about the current government schemes that's in place for businesses. So we have Michael Buckworth talking about explaining all about these schemes, and hopefully this will help you out. And at Tail Media, we have decided to help you all in a different way. So what we thought is that on BusinessWorks, we are gonna give you some free advertisement space, which means you can write to us about your business and why you want it, and we can place your adverts free of charge. So we thought that, you know, every little helps, right? We want to help the business peeps out there. Peeps. I just called peeps. But anyways, we've got Michael Buckworth today, and now we are going to talk about the investments part. Michael, over to you. Let's talk about investments during this lockdown period.
Sure. So, I mean, as I said earlier, I think one of the big challenges for businesses as we come towards the end of lockdown is actually how they're going to get up and running, and how they're going to relaunch their businesses, get employees back up and running and paying their salaries and all that kind of thing. And I think for many businesses, there's going to be a funding gap, which they're going to need to fill. So one of the routes is to look at the sort of the relief schemes to borrow the money that through the loan schemes that we've just talked about. But another route is actually raising investment. And I think perhaps it will surprise people, but there's actually a lot of investment activity going on in the market at the moment. And that's sort of across all stages of businesses. So obviously at the VC stage, so for companies who are raising bigger sums of money, a lot of the VCs are very active in the market. They are talking to businesses, they're trying to get out and use their money. And I think if you think about the logic of it, from the VC's perspective, lots of businesses are going to go bust. And what you're going to be left with, theoretically, is the stronger businesses, the ones who have got a better business model, a better product. And the VCs absolutely want to be in there making sure that they are shareholders. So there's a lot of competition in the market, but there's also a lot of money around. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the angels, so individual investors. And whilst some of them, perhaps many of them, are not quite as active at the moment because perhaps they've been furloughed themselves, they have challenges in their own lives. Right. There is still a good sizable rump of angel investors who are very, very active in the market and looking to invest. So what schemes are available? To recap, as always, there's the seed enterprise investment scheme and the enterprise investment scheme. They are absolutely still available. They're still being used, and businesses should, of course, take them very seriously. So what do those two schemes do? They basically give investors who invest in qualifying startups a percentage of the amount of their investment back as a credit from their income tax liabilities. So let me give an example. Let's say I invest 100,000 into a startup under SEIS. So that's the smaller scheme, which allows companies to raise up to 150,000. So I invest 100,000 into a startup under SEIS. I get 50% of that amount, so £50,000 back from HMRC pretty much immediately. Now, there's a bunch of rules around these schemes, but that's basically the principle. And as you can see, investors who invest and get that cash back have massively reduced their risk. It's a big incentive for them to invest in startups. Now, those schemes, as I say, very active. There are two problems, I think, for businesses at the moment. The first problem is that those schemes have a time limit on them. So under SEIS, the business can only have traded for 2 years. And under EIS, the business can only have traded for 7 years, except if it's a special innovative company. Right. So many SMEs won't qualify because of the time limits. The second problem is that there's something called the growth requirement. And what it basically means is that the money that is put in by the investors must be used to generate organic growth in revenue, customer, and employee numbers. Now, the problem is that it can't be used to pay off historic debt. And so one of the challenges for businesses is if over the past quarter, when they've been stuck in lockdown, they've accumulated a bunch of debt, whether that is formal loans or just money that perhaps has been put in by the founders. Right. Investment money under SEIS and EIS can't be used to pay that off. So it may not solve all of the solvency problems that businesses have got. Right. That said, people should not forget those schemes. They're hugely valuable and a great opportunity. Now, what the government have announced is 2 additional schemes. The first one is a future fund, which is effectively a matched funding scheme to help businesses who are at the level of VC investment. Mm-hmm. So firstly, let's be clear, this is not a scheme that is going to help early stage startups. It's also not a scheme that is going to help businesses who haven't raised money before, because in order to qualify for the scheme, businesses must have raised at least £250,000 from external investors in the last 5 years. Right. So there's a £250,000 qualification, and you have to raise from VCs rather than angels. Okay. So I would say quite a narrow group of startups who are likely to benefit from this. And being frank, it's probably the bigger, more successful tech startups who this qualifies for. To put it in context as well, the government have allocated £250 million for this. Sounds like a lot of money, but the government's matched funding, which is on a 50-50 basis, they will only invest the smallest amount, 125,000, and the largest amount, 5 million. So if you just look at it in terms of numbers, that's 1, maybe 2,000 startups the government are actually going to invest in. Think how many businesses there are in the UK. It's a pretty small scheme in practice. As far as eligibility goes, as far as the structure of the scheme goes, the government are putting in what are called convertible loans. So that means it's a debt instrument. They are lending money to the business. That loan is charged with an 8% interest each year. So it's actually a relatively expensive loan compared to some of the other loans available in the market. Right. The government will only invest if private investors, so VCs, put in the same amount of money. So, let's say you're doing, you want to raise a £10 million round. The government will put in 5 million of that, but you still have to find 5 million from somebody else, so from a VC. Right. The convertible loan, it can be repaid at the end of the term, which is a 3-year term. If it's repaid, you have to repay not just the principal amount of the loan, but also 100% of that again. So the repayment option is not hugely attractive, I suspect, for most businesses. And the loan will convert into equity. So what it means is the loan will be used to buy shares in the company at what's called the next qualifying round. And a qualifying round is an investment round where people buy shares and in aggregate they invest at least the same amount as the bridging round in which the government invests. So if the government put in 5 million into your bridging round today, and individual investors put in 5 million as well, that's a 10 million pound round. The government's convertible loan will convert at your next 10 million pound round.
Right. Okay.
So that's kind of the operation of that scheme. And as I say, to me, it's only really going to be relevant to a very small number of businesses.
Indeed. Yeah, because I think talking about all these schemes, businesses might be thinking, okay, like when you look at all these schemes and the eligibility can change massively, and some businesses might be thinking, okay, we can't apply for any of this, right? So talking about that, I would like to inform all our viewers that you can ask your questions, and if you have your questions like surrounding these schemes and how to apply, you can comment down below on our video, and then on our fourth segment we are gonna answer most of the questions as much as possible. And Mike, are we gonna go to the third segment? Shall we go for a quick break?
Sure, sounds good.
So we are talking about, as you can see, we are talking about all the government grants and schemes that's in place right now during the COVID-19 crisis. So we are going to be back after a short break.
AI Infinity really is about helping companies to enable them to use AI at the optimum level and to be more AI-driven companies to solve complicated use cases about the fraud, an example, or maybe customer engagement, facial recognition, and we just wanted to help them to be that. We would see ourselves as visionaries in detecting some edge computing on a very real-time basis of applications what we have here to enable companies to apply in different verticals.
Hi, it's Raj Mupala, founder and CEO of AI Infinity. We're all going through this COVID crisis. I'm sure it's affecting businesses and people. So as an AI company, we thought of helping businesses to understand customers better, and we created an application, Alive Core. It helps businesses to understand customers' risks and issues, sentiments very quickly, and obviously with less staff. And a typical example is that we're all going through in this COVID crisis to reach out to our banks and institutions to express our concerns, and there was no staff available to do. So our technology and application really helps to automate some of these processes and to help better customer experience and understand sentiments better. So stay tuned for more information and visit us at aiinfinity.co. And in the meantime, I would say stay healthy, take care, and we'll all go through this together. Thank you.
Welcome back to BusinessWorks, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about the current COVID crisis and the government grants and schemes that's in place for businesses. So there's Michael Buckworth, the managing partner at Buckworths, here speaking about all the relief systems and how to apply. And currently, we're actually talking about, spoke about funding. We spoke about all the grants and schemes that's available and how to apply. And if you need more information, you can drop a question down below, and we'll be talking about it after the next advert break. So now we are going to talk about, the segment is called Optimizing Outlook. what should businesses be doing to bridge the gap, to bridge the funding gap? Mike, over to you.
I mean, businesses right now have probably got a to-do list a mile long, I suspect. And it's all made much harder by the fact that none of us really know when this lockdown situation is going to end. So I personally, and I'm sure lots of people are doing the same, crossing my fingers that Boris Johnson will say something informative on Sunday and tell us exactly what's going to happen and how this is all going to get, we're all going to get back to normal. But anyway, as we get out of lockdown, I think, you know, there's a bunch of things that businesses should be doing. And actually, it sounds awful to say it, but I actually think there's a great opportunity for businesses who really get their act together, who are forward thinking, to come out of this this sort of current crisis almost in a stronger position than they were beforehand. Why is that? Well, lots of businesses are going to go bust. And in a way, if you can survive, that means there's less competition. There's going to be quite significant unemployment, which means that some really fantastic people are going to be on the jobs market. And if you're in a position to pick those people up, you know, that's great for your business. Equally, there's going to be, I think, a correction. There's going to be less businesses raising money. Investors are still going to have the same sorts of money to invest. And so you have an opportunity to actually go and pick up some of the money that perhaps would have gone elsewhere. So what should people be doing? I think the first thing is, if investment is something that's relevant to you and you think it is something you should be doing, get out there and talk to investors. What do you need to do in order to do that? Well, first you need to pull together a business plan if you haven't got one already. If you have got one, dust it off, you know, get it current, and sort of be prepared to go and talk to investors about that. Obviously, with that, cash flow forecast, P&L forecast, get all of that stuff ready. So that you have something coherent to say and you can pitch to investors in the right way. I think in parallel with that, don't be disheartened if you're not necessarily getting very far. Lots of people are talking to investors at the moment. A lot of investors have furloughed staff. Obviously, everyone's working from home, which makes life a bit harder. I think plug away at it, and I'm sure that good things will come from that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, make sure, do a sanity check, make sure you claim the reliefs that you're eligible for. So the one that strikes me as being most useful to people is actually the bounce back loan scheme. That scheme, up to 50,000 or 25% of your turnover, you do need to have been trading at the end of March. But if you're eligible for that, it's a very simple form. You can fill in yourself. You don't have to provide business plans, cash flow forecasts, all of that stuff. And it's being approved relatively quickly. And the initial information that's been released by the banks is that the approval rate is really high compared to the initial days of the bigger scheme, which is around about 2%. They reckon the approval rating on this scheme is north of 50%. So, you know, get your act sorted on that. Next topic, really important, staff. Staff are crucial to our businesses. If we don't look after our staff and we don't retain the right staff, then our businesses, you know, are going to fail. So I think the next thing on the to-do list is figuring out what the deal is going to be with our staff. Are we going to be able to bring them all back into the office? Are we going to keep an office? Maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to keep people working from home. If we're not going to be able to keep everybody, what are we going to do about that? Now, what I would say here is, particularly for businesses getting rid of you know, a significant percentage of their team, they do need to talk to a lawyer about it, because there are redundancy consultation rules. If you get it wrong, you can end up liable for very significant amounts of money. Getting it right is relatively straightforward, and lawyers can certainly help with that, but getting it wrong can be a big problem. So thinking through that sort of redundancy process is important. And then our offices, we have workspaces, whether they're restaurants or shared workspaces or offices. Realistically, we're all going to have to comply with some basic social distancing rules. Whether that be stuff that is set down by government and is mandated for employers, or whether it's just stuff that we need to do to make sure that our team feels safe, that they feel comfortable coming back to work. And I think it's really important to think that through. What I would say from our bitter experience is really not as straightforward as it looks. So yeah, fine, you have social distancing, you keep people's desks apart, you sort of make sure that people are not, clustered up close to each other. But there's some really problematic things, like what happens about kitchen facilities? What happens about toilets and use of toilets? What happens about sort of entrance halls and queuing for lifts? I think employers need to figure all of that stuff out as well. And getting that sort of communication out to employees as soon as possible is really important.
Right. And when you talk about the opportunities, Mike, like now let's say I work with a lot of startups as well, and when we talk about business ideas, we generate these ideas throughout the years, right? And we work on an idea, and like we fine tune it, and then when we are ready to present it, and then find someone who can just help us with this. This might be outdated, don't you think, in certain ways? Like this was completely sudden, and businesses never thought that there's going to be a huge lockdown, and this is like a really weird time for businesses as well. They weren't expecting something like this. So when you go and speak to all these people, do you think that some of these business ideas might be outdated in a way?
Yeah, I do, and I also think that the businesses who are likely to be most successful are those businesses who are almost seeing COVID-19 as an opportunity. So, I mean, to give silly examples, and there's, thousands of them every day. On a really simplistic level, you have restaurants who have adapted their menus to suit takeaway rights. You've got gyms who have moved on to who are doing everything virtually. So one of our clients has a pretty traditional high intensity gym. They have created the most insane sort of online workouts with their clients, and they're actually picking up new customers who are all paying for the services with these really fantastic, really high quality, really well done online sessions. We've got platform businesses who sort of match people working with children, who have moved into online sort of storytelling and online education to provide a way for parents who've suddenly got their kids at home to keep them occupied and keep them happy. I think that sort of innovation is what is going to keep businesses alive and is actually going to make them successful. And my instinct is that actually businesses who are doing this kind of stuff are going to come out way ahead, because, yes, their old business may be viable, but they've suddenly got a new string to their bow. They've got new things that they can do. And it might be they stop doing the new stuff, but they can certainly adapt some of the things they've learned into their existing business.
And talking about these new businesses and new strategies, right? Everyone's coming up with new strategies and thinking of new ways of doing their business, maybe new ways of, in terms, let's say, the workflow of a business. It's changing rapidly. So thinking about all these schemes and all these opportunities that the government is having for these businesses, what kind of businesses do you think that has a better chance, with the experience that you have right now, to actually survive this crisis? What do you think about that? Any thoughts that you have?
I think in practice, businesses who had a good business before the crisis, there's in most circumstances no reason why they can't continue to have a business going forwards. I think there are obviously some sectors that are really going to struggle. If you're in the travel sector, presumably life does not look rosy right now. Although actually we did some research for our current campaign, a media campaign we're doing around sort of rebooting British businesses post COVID-19. And bizarrely, the sector who was most optimistic about the future was the travel sector. I don't get the logic of it, but actually of the people surveyed, they were one of the most sort of optimistic sectors. But that sector, I think there's going to be a very significant move in the way that people use property. So huge numbers of our clients are coming back to us and saying, we don't think we're going to have a fixed office going forwards. We're going to keep people working from home and use a sort of a service workspace for meetings and stuff like that. So I think, maybe the sort of property sector is going to go through a bit of a tough time. But I think, if you look at our economy, it's a pretty developed economy. Business sectors exist because people want to use them. I don't for a minute think that in a year's time, actually in a month's time, people are not going to go out to restaurants. Of course they are. We all love going out to eat in a restaurant. I think a lot of sectors of the economy will come back. It's just a question of timing. But I also think it's about, there's a sort of broader point about what can businesses do to get ahead of the curve. And I kind of think that online, digital, those sorts of spaces are obviously going to benefit from this, because suddenly people are used to, being online more. Take Zoom as an example. I mean, we occasionally use Zoom for work. I spend 2/3 of my current day on Zoom.
Right.
Even when we go back to the office, and even when we have face-to-face meetings, I know that Zoom will now be a regular method for us to catch up with clients.
Indeed. I think even for us, the workflow completely changed. And now we usually wanted to do this particular show in a studio environment with a live audience. But now, like, even you're joining through Zoom. So all of our guests join through Zoom, and it's completely different. Even our workflow, we were struggling at the initial stage. And I remember my broadcast manager was like having a nightmare, basically. He couldn't sleep for 3 days in a way, but I think it's a part of this change, I think. And right now,
it's an interesting point, though, isn't it? Like change, you either adapt to it or you fail.
Indeed.
And I think that is going to be a key factor going forwards for a lot of businesses.
I think loads of businesses should learn to like make changes as well, because certain businesses I mean humans, we hate changes, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is a good time to learn from this this COVID-19 crisis. So ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go for a quick break, and we are going to answer some of your questions. And I'm actually receiving a lot of questions on Instagram of our film school members who are doing some filming. Actually has a lot of interesting questions. But anyways, we'll be back after this break.
AI Infinity is about helping companies to deliver AI solutions quickly, securely, at low cost. So we developed a platform where the customers the organizations can able to develop solutions quickly at a very high speed and a low cost. So the platform has got a power of AI engine and a real good visualizations platform, which is very unique in the market, and it's mainly aimed for AI for business users. So where the business users and the data analysts can able to build AI solutions quickly by using a very quick drag and drop functionality, and they can build solutions in a matter of few hours with our platform. This is where the unique advantage of AI Infinity is about. We help deliver a lot of complex solutions in financial services like fraud detection models, credit card fraud, predictive models, customer engagement, and to optimize business value and increase ROI. So this is a real-time edge detection with AI, computer vision. So it's actually recognizing the people in a real time, as you could see, multiple people walking in here. So you can able to see the recognition of different people and different personas happening as moving in real time. So the power of this application, what we developed, is at a very low cost and very high powered application, where you can actually apply that into different scenarios like smart city and security and surveillance, and perhaps in different verticals to identify the facial recognition example, or maybe a fraud, different scenarios. And the power of this application here is that it's very low cost and high power and without internet connectivity. AI at the edge.
Welcome back to BusinessWorks, ladies and gentlemen. This is our third show where we've got Mike or Michael Buckworth from the Buckworths talking about the current COVID schemes and grants that the government has in place during this crisis. I hope this, actually we have spoken a lot about the particular grants and like how to we were talking about funding, we were talking about startups, and now we are ready to answer your questions. And before we go for the segment, I would like to add that you still have the chance to comment down, ask your questions, and Mike will be ready to answer. And at the same time, we at Tail Media, we have decided to give some free advertisement space on our show. So all you have to do is write to us, share. I mean, you should be seeing the live banner on the bottom of the video. It should have all the, social media banners and our tags and everything. You can use any of our social media just to drop us a line, talk about your business, and we are more than happy to help you all advertise your services. And this show is all about helping businesses, spreading, giving out knowledge, bringing out special guests to talk about, businesses basically. You can learn something new. So we will go back to Michael Buckworth with the first question. And the first question comes from a lot of filmmakers. Remember, guys, we were talking about the film industry and the impact the COVID has and had on the film industry. We spoke about it in our second episode. You can go to Tail Media YouTube page and watch that. And by the way, Mike, there are some filmmakers asking about the schemes that the government has for self-employed people. How do you know and how much will they be getting and how to apply for these schemes? Will the government just inform you? And one person is actually asking whether do we have to apply for these schemes, or just will the government actually inform you that we are eligible or not? So what do you think?
Yeah, so the government won't inform you, unfortunately. So you're going to have to take steps yourself. I think there are two possible routes. The first scheme is a little bit like the furlough scheme for employees. So the government will pay up to 80% of your self-employed income if you're eligible for the scheme. So in order to be eligible, you have to have filed a tax return for the 2018-19 tax year. So you need to have been trading as a self-employed business during that tax year. Your earnings have to be under 50K. So you can only, you need to be that sort of earlier stage, sort of smaller self-employed business. I don't actually know if the scheme is available yet. What I would suggest is if you Google the coronavirus self-employed scheme, there's a government page on it which sets out the eligibility criteria, and if it has been opened, then there's a gateway to enable you to apply for it. But you will need to make an application yourself. The government won't jump in and help you. Second option, if you don't qualify for that scheme, is unfortunately just universal credit, which is effectively the new unemployment benefit. Now, the good news is that the government increased the monthly allowance for universal credit at the beginning of this crisis. The bad news is that there is a massive, and I mean insanely long, delay to get universal credit claims processed. Right. The process is you have to fill in an online form, you have to get a bunch of codes. Once you've completed that application, the government will then allocate you a date to attend an unemployment centre, a job centre, where you'll have an interview. There are a bunch of eligibility criteria, so you cannot have more than a certain amount of savings. There's a whole bunch of sort of detail there. Again, for more information on that, you just Google universal credit, and you'll definitely be provided with more information than you probably ever want to see. Right,
perfect. And we've got another question from Raj. So he's actually commented saying it's great insights, Mike. Business bounce back loans. All lenders are serving their own clients. most of startup banks like Revolt. And can you let us know who are the banks and who are these online banks who doesn't offer this loan, and is there a specific type of banks that offers these kind of loans? He wants to
Yeah.
get some information about it.
Yeah, sure. So banks have to be accredited by the British Business Bank, which is the government sort of funding bank, in order to provide the loans. If you go onto the British Business Bank's website and you just search for bounce back loans, there's a list of accredited lenders. It's got all of the standard people you'd expect, so HSBC, Lloyds, NatWest. It also has a couple of what I would sort of loosely call challenger banks. So the one that struck me was Starling Bank. Now, Starling are pretty good. You can open an account online through the app really fast. They generally process the anti-money laundering checks within sort of 24, 48 hours. Once you have a bank account with them, you are able to apply for the bounce back loan scheme. So you could, if you wanted, just go and set up an account and apply straight away. That aside, technically the banks are supposed to be servicing not only their own clients, but also non-client businesses. I think the criteria for most banks is that you would need to open an account with them, but as I understand it, that should be something that can happen once they've approved the loan rather than beforehand. But you may well be right, Raj, that the practice is different from the theory. I think I would say give Starling Bank a try. They're generally pretty cooperative and perhaps a little bit ahead of the sort of high street banks in terms of process.
Okay, and we've got another person who's asking for startups, who's in the first stage of he has just registered his company. So are there any schemes that will help him out during this period?
Probably not, to be honest. The bounce back loan scheme would only apply if you were trading back in March. So if you just set up your company, you wouldn't qualify for that. There aren't really any other schemes, unfortunately, for new startups. I think what I would say, if you've got a business model that potentially is open for investment, talk to some of the early stage funds, maybe see if you can build your network and attract some angels. That's probably your best bet. In terms of early stage funds who are in the market, there's actually lots of them. People like Jensen Funding, I think they're quite active at the moment. They've got their green fund open, which is one of their current investment funds. There's a bunch of other people. If you want to drop me an email, I can actually send you a list of the current sort of funds who are sort of open and active in the market. Very happy to share that with everybody.
Perfect. What I'll do is I'll share your contact information, like LinkedIn account and your email down below after the show. So if you watch the show, after the live stream, you'll be able to see all the information we'll place. And there's another question, and this person's like, they have been trading for like 9 months now. So are we eligible to for any grants that's available right now? I'm just guessing because his tax year is not completed.
Yeah, it sort of depends on the structure. So if you're a limited company, you would actually potentially be eligible for the bounce back loan. So that might be something to have a look at. You can get information on that on our website or on the British Business Bank's website about sort of detail of that. So that might be suitable for you. If you have premises and you're in a sort of restaurant, leisure, hospitality, then the local authority will write to you and tell you if you're eligible for rates relief. So that's sort of done for you. For self-employed, in all likelihood, no, you're not eligible for that scheme. But check the latest guidance on the government's website just to make sure. But in all likelihood, it sounds like you wouldn't be eligible for that.
Yeah, perfect. And one person, it's more like a comment. He was telling, it's more like a comment that he's like, he's from a film student. So he has bought some cameras for the company and stuff like. I mean, I think this is more relevant to us as well. And he's talking about throughout 6-7 months, if you're in lockdown, and all the equipment that they bought is useless basically. So he's like saying that it's no point of, like when you come out of this situation, maybe this equipment will be outdated. And it's more like a comment. Well, personally, I think so too, because it's an expense in a way for us as well. But I think of new ways of, working with this equipment, isn't it?
Oh, I tell you, exactly. That to me is the answer. Then, yeah, of course, assets depreciate over time, and it sounds like in the film industry, the technology moves on quite fast. But all you can do is take as best advantage of what's going on as possible. And to be honest, everyone is stuck at home. Everyone is, if they're normally looking at the newspapers, they're going on the newspapers and seeing that it's deeply depressing. And actually, there's not much to report and not much to read. So I genuinely think people are looking at new content. So find something interesting to do, make new content, use the equipment that way.
Yeah, indeed. And yep, that's all we, yeah. Is that all we have? If I can, yep. So that's all the questions. I understood a lot about these schemes, and even I was confused. And these are not easy schemes to understand. And the other thing is, we are gonna send all the information, place all the information about Mike down below after the live stream. So make sure you contact him if you need any help. He'll be happy to help with this. Help you understand.